What's up, friends? Welcome back to the channel. My name is Fresha, and I'm a 33-year-old creative director living by yourself here in New York City. I'm always trying to figure out how to live a happier, healthier, more creative life, and since you clicked on the video, I'm hoping that you and I can learn how to build the lives that we want together. Today, we're talking about being in your 20s. Listen, guys, public service announcement, big news alert. Being in your 20s is hard. Surprise. As if you didn't already know. And this is something that I, wise in my 33 years here on planet Earth, think about a lot. I had a great time in my 20s. But it was also so hard. And I don't think it's made any easier by older people, whether it's millennials who are in their 30s to condescending boomers. I don't think that older generations make it easier to be at this challenging age in this challenging time, because a lot of times the ways people talk about 20-somethings or their memories of being 20-somethings often just comes off as condescending, pedantic, and just really lacking in empathy. So I thought today we would go in the opposite direction and offer some real but empathetic talk for all my 20-somethings out there, okay? So let's head into the video. All right, first reason your 20s are so hard is that the world romanticizes being in your 20s in an unrealistic and often unhelpful way. Our world is literally filled with glorified messaging around youth, setting high expectations for what your life should look like in your 20s. And trust me, I am more than familiar with this messaging. I work in brand marketing. Like, I spend 8 hours a day, 5 days a week doing cohort analysis, reading about the different generations and their buying preferences, what the world feels like to them. And I can tell you, the 20-somethings, the Gen Zers, the Consumer Reports are not painting a pretty picture. Literally all you have to do is click on Netflix, pull up Spotify, watch a random TV show or listen to a random podcast, and try to tell me that that glorified messaging about youth does not dominate all of the media that you watch, listen to, scroll through, and read on the internet. This is especially the case on social media. It seems like everywhere you turn, you run into people glorifying youth, clinging to implications or stereotypes of age. Some people even going so far as to throw shade on people not even 5 years older than them, calling them old, hags, ugly, aging, wrinkly. Sweeties, that's toxic. Never forget, the Grim Reaper is coming for all of us one day, eventually. And by the Grim Reaper, I mean smile lines, crow's feet, and an AARP membership. There is no sure way to set yourself up for a quarter-life crisis or a midlife crisis than by subscribing to that shitty, immature mentality. So don't do it. It doesn't serve you now, and it'll hurt you later on. But also look, like, I get it. Sometimes in your 20s, it does kind of feel like you're getting like a raw end of a deal, or like the math is not mathing. Like, these 40-year-olds not only can now afford to look like they're in their 20s, but they also have like the money, the relationships, the job certainty. And I'm 20 and I naturally look this way, but like, I can't afford shit. My anxiety's through the roof. I'm looking for a job. No jobs in sight. I'm looking for a partner. Where are they? I get it, okay? Hurt people, they say. We are so constantly inundated with messaging around the glorification of youth, a false sense of urgency, and a societal level fear of aging that it is really hard not to fall into that trap. In your 20s, there's so many expectations around what you should look like, what a career or professional life looks like, how much money you should be earning, what you should be doing with that money, what your social life should look like, what types of relationships you should be in, and when you should be in them. Your 20s are fucking exhausting. However, succumbing to these tropes around aging and youth also means that you're accepting a false, or at very best, unnecessary binary. And that makes you very vulnerable to opinions around what your life should look like and when you should be doing things by. I remember probably in my early to mid 20s, I read this book called The Defining Decade by Meg Jay. And I'm gonna try to be generous with the author here because she probably had the best intentions in writing her book, but throughout her whole book, she rails on and on about how basically 20-somethings, I think at the time it was millennials, my generation, about how 20-somethings are basically oblivious to all of the life-altering decisions they need to make within the next 10 years. Everything from having babies to getting married to getting ahead in your career. She raised some fair points, but ultimately, this tragic story she was trying to tell was centered on this precious idea of a traditional and normal trajectory of career, marriage, and childbearing that maybe made sense in the 1980s, but in our turbulent and ever-changing world came off as a little tone deaf. Also, as an aside, boomers and Gen Xers wringing their hands about the youths is by no means a new phenomenon, but that does not make it any less annoying or condescending, particularly when you're talking to young people about having kids because it's really hard for that well-meaning or concerned rhetoric to avoid the stench of have-it-all feminism, which we all know and love, of course. Listen to me when I tell you, dear viewer, this book absolutely fucking panicked me. And I am certain that it contributed to more than its fair share of my anxiety I felt throughout my 20s. It just made me constantly feel inadequate, like I was behind, like I wasn't earning enough, or I wasn't learning quickly enough, or that I was being too picky in relationships, that I was doomed to be alone and doomed to be poor, and that I was just fucking my life up with each passing day. And I'm sure if you're in your 20s and you're watching this now, that might not sound too far off from the feelings you may be feeling in your own life. I wish I could have just put that book down then and known then that this was just one person's perspective. I didn't have to accept it. I wish someone could have told me that there is no right way to live your 20s, other than to figure out who you are, what your values are, and what makes you happy. In summary, the world is constantly sending us ageist messaging, and this can activate a false sense of urgency and unnecessary pressure in your life, and set unrealistic expectations for what one's 20s should look like and what needs to be done in this decade. Alright, reason number two. Reason number two, your 20s are so hard, is that you are going through so much transition in a big way, likely for the first time. So your 20s are defined by transition. When you first enter your 20s, you are kicking off a decade of transition. And this is true no matter what your path is, whether or not you're graduating from university, maybe you're a few years out from a trade school, maybe you've been in your first job for a couple of years and you're looking for your next one. It's funny to consider the concentration of milestones you have in your first 21 years of life compared to how less concentrated they are in the rest of your life. I live in the US, so our timeline or sequence might look a little different from someone else living in another part of the world, but in broad strokes, it's all quite similar. Like, you go to high school, you get your driver's license, you graduate from high school, you turn 18, you go to college or trade school, or you start your first job, you turn 21, you can party, you graduate from school if that was your path, and then maybe you start your first job out of school, or if you already had a job, you're looking for your next one. That's a lot of firsts, that's a lot of learning, that's a lot of big kid things in a short amount of time. And also don't forget, sprinkled in there are all of the things that make life beautiful and rich and challenging and catalyzing. First loves and first heartbreaks, leaving old friends and forming new ones, losing loved ones and learning new things. Your 20s are a naturally more turbulent time compared to the rest of your life. It can sometimes feel like a game of musical chairs as everyone is trying to figure out where their place in life is, who they are, what they want, and where they fit in. And to be sure, there are periods of transition later in life too. People choose to get married or commit to a partner. Some people choose to have kids. People leave jobs and they start new ones. They move to new cities and different countries. But the thing is, once you're past that initial phase of transition in your late teens and early 20s, it's different because not everyone is doing those things at the same time. But when you're younger and going through all of these things for the first time, it feels like everyone around you is moving at hyperspeed, and that can sometimes feel destabilizing. Also, later in life, you have already been through that first phase of 20-something transition, so you have a few tricks up your sleeve already. You've got your reps in, you're a little bit more practiced, a little bit more conditioned to change. But when you're in your 20s, all of it is so new and can sometimes feel overwhelming. And it can be really easy to think it's gonna feel this challenging forever. I think this is something that many of us who are not in our 20s, this is something that we don't talk about that much because honestly, I think we've probably forgotten about it. Like, it's kind of like PTSD when you kind of like have rosier memories of challenging times in your past. And you also, like, some people have this like annoying like heroic posture of like, well, I had to go through it or I got through it. And it's like, yes, that's true, but like you don't have to be a dick about it. You can be empathetic to people. And I think a lot of people who are older, they're almost like desensitized to that feeling of change or transition, or they've just gotten so used to it. Again, like I said, they're conditioned to it. But know that just because people don't talk about it doesn't mean that it's not true for you, and that's okay. Know that you will get used to this feeling of change eventually. You'll eventually master it or become more comfortable with it, like many of us did. I think for a lot of older folks, like they did just kind of get used to it, and it's easy to forget how stressful and overwhelming and foreign everything is when you had to go through it for the first time in your 20s. All right, next reason why your 20s are tough is you are just making money for the first time, and you are very likely just now learning about your relationship to money. So when you're in your 20s, a new relationship enters your life that's super important, that literally no one talks about except for like Dave fucking Ramsey, and that few people are prepared for, and that is your relationship with money. So fun. Okay, I'm gonna go ahead and editorialize here because this was very important to me in my 20s. Money was a major source of stress for me in my 20s. In my early 20s, I did not make a lot of money. My first job out of college, I made $36,000 living in Los Angeles. And you might say, well, that's like above the poverty line. Like, that sounds decent. Again, let me reiterate, I was living in Los Angeles and I also had student loans. I think my paycheck each payday was maybe like, it was either $1,050 or $1,150. And my rent was $900, which means like almost half my paycheck was going to rent. Now, to be totally transparent here, this was partially by choice. I mean, not the pay, I would have loved to be paid more, but I did choose to go work in a lower paying creative industry. That is what I do for work now. I'm a brand and creative director. But listen, first jobs in this industry are notoriously brutal. Not only do they work you to the bone, they pay you nothing for it. Actually, oftentimes you have to pay them just for the opportunity. And also, I did not come from a comfortable, how do I want to say this nicely? I didn't come from a family background that could help me that much if, say, for instance, I couldn't pay rent 1 month. I just didn't grow up in that kind of household. We were rich in a lot of things, but, you know, we were always conscious about money. I went to school on scholarship and federal grants, and I had to take out student loans to help pay the rent. So regardless of whether you find yourself in a similar position, either by choice or by circumstance, trust me when I tell you, I know it's incredibly stressful. And I know it is so hard to not have your internal dialogue be so completely dominated by your fear of money all the time. Because that is how I felt for a good portion of my early 20s. And while I don't have any stats on hand here, I do imagine, while maybe not normal, I imagine it's maybe a more common experience than even I was led to believe when I was younger. Most of the people I knew in my earlier 20s, and most of the people I know now today who are still in their 20s, are still gaining their footholds in terms of their earning power. If it's any consolation, it's only a little bit over 10 years since I've had that first job, and I am making multiples of that initial salary. I know that's not the case for everyone, but I think the general trend is like, you're gonna earn more money eventually, hopefully. I can't make you any promises because I don't know who you are, but I did, and I have much less anxiety about money today. And any material concerns about money can be made even worse by the fact that if you're like most people, you're likely just starting to learn about your relationship to money. Money is an extremely triggering topic for many people. For some, it might be because they watched a loved one struggle with money while they were growing up. For others, it might be because no one ever spoke to them about money. Now, we all have to be responsible for it, and I don't know about you and your friends, but at least within my peer group, none of us had this inborn financial literacy coming into our first jobs. My friends who were really responsible with their money when we all had our first jobs, their parents like literally worked in finance or real estate or like money and asset management. So like they literally had those specific money management skills and like not even passed it down to their kids, but like managed their kids' money for them. For most of my friends in our first jobs, like we really did fuck around and find out. In addition, in your 20s, it's likely that the people within your social circle not only make very different household incomes from each other, but they also very likely come from different levels of generational wealth. And this might not be a problem, but it can indirectly lead to peer pressure around money. There might be unstated expectations around what your group of friends does together, who can afford what, who pays for what. It's a whole friggin' thing, just believe me. And this discrepancy in pay or familial wealth can often lead to a comparison game between friends, which is one of the most unproductive and toxic dynamics that can enter an otherwise happy relationship. And when it comes to comparison, do not even get me started on social media. While I had Instagram and YouTube in my early 20s, the platforms were nowhere near where they are today in terms of influencer deals and brand sponsorships. I couldn't even imagine being a young 20-something today and trying to understand money and finances and real value while being surrounded by so much consumerism every time I checked my phone or opened up my laptop. This financial literacy and media literacy eventually came later on in my 20s, but it did make for a turbulent emotional landscape before all of that was developed. And at the start of my 20s, I really wish that I had had some type of benchmark around how to think about money and salaries and finances, especially given that I was at the start of my career and in the midst of a shifting digital landscape. All right, the penultimate reason. The next reason why your 20s can be very challenging is your relationships are changing very quickly. Around 18, your social networks start to change for a number of reasons. You're either going off somewhere else for school or maybe a job, or your friends are leaving the place that you all grew up together. Then, again, in your early 20s, the same thing happens. People move to new cities for graduate schools. They pack up and leave for jobs to build lives in new cities. The social network you worked so hard to build over the past few years undergoes a tectonic shift. Saying goodbye to friends always feels sad, even if the goodbye is for a good reason, like a new job across the country. And losing the people you just spent years building relationships with can feel destabilizing and lonely. And your relationship with your family can change too. I know some friends, once they graduated from college, were asked to take on more responsibilities within their family, whether that was like actual physical care or financial contributions, or maybe even something as simple as the way our parents and our siblings talk to us changes dramatically. All of a sudden, in family gatherings, instead of being asked those innocent questions of childhood, like, what's your favorite subject in school? What sports are you playing? You're now all of a sudden being asked these heavyweight questions like, what are your life plans? Where are you going to live? What jobs are you applying to? Do you have a partner? Do you want kids? You're like, literally, please just let me eat my egg roll, you know? I do think the early stage of adulthood really is trial by fire. Like, they do not prepare you for this shit in school. This can be jarring. You have just gone through 20 years of being regarded one way by your family and your friends. You've gone several years with the same friends, and all of a sudden those things are changing beneath your feet. And for a lot of people, this is the first time these important relationships have changed significantly. You didn't realize how much you'd relied on these people and the relationships, the identity that these people reinforced in you. You didn't realize how much you relied on that until they started to change. Don't forget, identities can be so relational, and when the people you've relied on to be a certain way all this time start to change or leave, it can be jarring to your sense of identity and where you stand in the world and where you fit in. Which really is the whole theme of this decade and leads me perfectly into my next and final point. All of the above points coalesce into what is simultaneously the hardest and also what is likely the most normal thing about your 20s, which is you don't know who you fully are yet. First of all, a quick reminder to any 20-something who is watching. This is totally okay. And like I said, totally normal. No one expects you to know who you are yet. And if they do, they shouldn't. That's a them problem. And to be fair, what does it mean to know oneself? You know, I don't think there's ever like a discrete point in one's lifetime where they know every deep recess and high expression of themselves. You're a human being, which means you are an object perpetually in motion. Learning who you are is a lifelong process. I'm not sitting here telling you I'm some like fully actualized person who knows with depth and precision every corner of my mind. Like, no, but I do know that a lot better today at 33 than I did at 23. In your 20s, everything still feels like a possibility. Everything feels new. Everything feels momentous and significant. And that's because it is. Everything is new. You're likely doing many things for the first time. That does make it momentous and significant. And that's pretty exciting and that's pretty fun. But it can also feel disorienting and confusing and aimless. You don't have the same points of reference around how to make certain decisions, how to deal with changes or handle confrontation, how to calculate risk or handle rejection. You don't have those same points of reference at 22 years old that you do when you're a little bit older. The only points of reference you have are from when you were a teenager, when your life looked really different. And as we just covered back then, it was likely more stable, or even if it wasn't more stable, you know, you likely lived with your family. It was a little bit more regimented because you were in school. There was a schedule imposed upon your life. Your friends were different and the way you spent your days were different. You had less responsibility and your identity was constantly being reinforced by the people around you. In your 20s, you don't have any of that context anymore. You have just undergone an incredible period of change and transition at like a breakneck pace. And so many of the things you're doing now, you're doing for the first time. Your 20s are like the toddler phase of adulthood. You're learning how to walk, talk, eat, read, love, make mistakes, get hurt, say sorry, all for the first time as an adult. And because societal norms are changing so quickly, such as when you should get married by, whether or not you even want to be married or partnered, whether or not you want to start a family, home ownership, how closely you should live near your family, all of that, you might not be able to rely exclusively on the advice of your family anymore. The original source of learning and support when you were a toddler. Because when they were 20, they might not have had the same options available to them, or societal expectations were different. Like, you're running a different calculus than they had to. And that can feel lonely and isolating and confusing. And if it's feeling that way right now, I'm really sorry. But what I hope is helpful is this. It's totally normal, and it does get better. You will, in due time, faster than you think you will figure out your likes and your dislikes, your biases, your prejudices, your preferences, what your strengths are, and where you need to grow. You'll learn how to grow. You'll develop the friends who will support you along the way. This is all coming to you quickly, so just hold on tight. It might not make it better right now, but hopefully it does make you feel a little less alone. Remember, your 20s are fucking hard. No one talks about it, and it feels like it's always going to be this way. They're not. Trust me. You cannot imagine the person you are going to be at 33, what your life is going to look like, the crazy things you'll experience in this literal obstacle course of a decade. You cannot imagine how much you are going to laugh at yourself when you look back at this decade, and how tender and loving and proud you are going to feel when you are 33 years old and thinking back on the version of yourself that is watching this today. You got it. Okay? All right. We are losing daylight, so that is all we have for today's video. I hope you found this video helpful. If you did, please make sure to like and subscribe. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll catch you in the next one. Bye!